I slammed my truck door and stared at my own front porch in disbelief. Pink children's bikes scattered across the deck. Muddy work boots by the door. A folded stroller leaning against the rail like someone lived here. But this was my ranch, 40 acres of Colorado mountain land I'd inherited from my father. I had just driven 14 hours straight from Arizona after cutting my business trip short, only to find the front door wide open and the smell of roast chicken drifting out like a welcome sign. A dog barked inside. Not my dog. Laughter spilled out. Dishes clattered. I crept closer and peered through the window. That's when I saw her, Karen Simons, HOA president from McKinley Estates across the creek, sitting at my dining table wearing one of my flannel shirts like it belonged to her. Her husband Tom stood barefoot in my kitchen, drinking from a mug I recognized from the green set I'd bought at Walmart. 2 kids ran around in socks on my wooden floors. My hands trembled with confusion and rage. I reached for the door handle and pushed it open hard. It banged against the wall. Karen's head whipped toward me, eyes going wide like a deer in headlights. "Oh my God," she gasped, standing up fast. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" I shouted. "This is my house. What are you doing here?" She turned pale, then scrambled for her phone. "You're trespassing," she shrieked. "I'm calling 911. And she did. She actually called the police on me, the owner of my own ranch. Now hold up. How did we get to the point where Karen was calling the police on me? The rightful owner of a 40-acre ranch I inherited from my father. Let's go back. Hi. I'm Jacob Walker, 45 years old. Widower. Former Army medic. My wife Hannah passed 6 years ago, and I've lived quietly since then. Just me. My memories. And my land. The ranch? Stone Pine Ridge. Sits in Colorado, about an hour outside Denver. It's not fancy, but it's mine. My father left it to me, and I've kept it running ever since. I don't belong to any HOA. In fact, this area never had one until the McKinley Estates folks moved into the development across Willow Creek and formed their own association. They're the gated community type with speed bumps and rules about mailbox colors. I'm the dirt road type with chickens and a barn full of memories. We were friendly at first, until Karen showed up. Karen Simons, HOA president. Short blonde hair, always with designer sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. She lived in the biggest house in McKinley Estates, but she never respected boundaries. She started with little things, notes about my unkempt grass, complaints about the unsightly farm tools I left on the porch. She'd walk her prissy little terrier through my pasture like it was public parkland. Then came the letters. Harassment. Really. Official HOA letterhead demanding I comply with their community standards. I always tossed them in the burn barrel. I wasn't part of her HOA. She had no legal authority here. Or so I thought. The trouble really started 2 weeks before this confrontation. I'd left for Arizona to help my cousin recover from surgery, boarded up the windows, turned off the utilities, set my security cameras to motion alerts. Standard procedure when leaving the ranch unattended. My neighbor Daryl usually checked in, but he got called away to Montana for a family emergency. That's the gap Karen exploited. I should have seen the warning signs. 2 weeks before my trip, I found a notice in my mailbox, not regular mail, but an official-looking document from McKinley HOA enforcement, demanding I comply with community standards and prepare for property rezoning assessment. I laughed at first. My land predated their entire development by decades. My property lines were clearly surveyed and recorded. Next day, Karen came over in person. "I'm just here as a courtesy," she said with a forced smile. "Adjusting those ridiculous sunglasses, the HOA will be making some updates to the land management in this area. It would be best if you considered relocating early. You'll receive a fair market offer soon." I stared at her. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm very serious," she replied sweetly. The community has decided this area needs improvement. You don't own my land? Karen. Well, the HOA believes there's a legal pathway, she said, taking pictures of my front yard like she was collecting evidence. We'd hate for this to become difficult. It sounded like a threat. I told her to leave. She did, but not before snapping more photos and making notes on her clipboard. A few days later, I left for Arizona. I installed a new deadbolt, activated the security system, and told Daryl to check in weekly. What I didn't know was that Karen had been watching, waiting, planning. On the drive back from Arizona, something kept nagging at me. Call it intuition. I call it paranoia. I couldn't shake the feeling something was wrong. I left a day early and drove through the night. No calls. No warnings. I just needed to see the ranch. And now here I was, face to face with Karen calling 911, claiming I was trespassing on my own property. Yes, there's a dangerous man here claiming he owns this place. Karen told the dispatcher, pacing frantically. He's screaming at my children. I wasn't screaming. I hadn't even raised my voice since the initial shock. Her husband Tom now stood protectively in front of the kids like I was going to attack them. I kept my voice level. You broke into my home, I said firmly. This is my land. My name is on the deed. You are trespassing. Karen spun around, eyes blazing. You were gone. The HOA considered the property abandoned and transferred management to us under emergency relocation protocols. I almost laughed. You can't just decide that. This isn't your jurisdiction. The community board passed a motion. She hissed. It's not your land anymore. Officers are on their way. She continued, smirking. You'll be removed. Then she turned to her husband. Pack up the photos and jewelry. Take them to the truck just in case. Photos, jewelry. My stomach twisted as I realized she hadn't just been staying here. She'd moved in completely. Everything looked rearranged. My father's recliner was gone, replaced by a pink sectional sofa. Family photos of my parents no longer hung on the mantel. Instead, Karen's family smiled from frames positioned around my fireplace like they'd always lived here. The sound of sirens made Karen smile triumphantly. Looks like help is coming, she said smugly. I stepped outside, not from fear, but because I wanted the officers to see me calm and reasonable, but I had no idea what lies Karen had told them, and whether they'd even believe me. 2 patrol cars rolled up the dirt driveway. 4 officers stepped out, hands resting on their gun belts. One shouted, "Sir, step away from the property." That's when I realized they might actually believe her. This is my house, I said calmly, raising both hands slowly. My name is Jacob Walker. I live here. They're the ones who broke in. Karen came bounding down the steps like an actress in a courtroom drama, tears already streaming. Officers, thank God you're here, she cried, grabbing the lead officer's arm. This man forced his way onto our property. He threatened my children. My children, my property. I blinked hard. Ma'am, we're going to sort this out, the officer said gently. Please take your children inside while we speak with the gentleman. Karen shot me a victorious smirk before marching back up the steps like she owned the place. I have ID, I said, patting my jacket pocket. And the deed to this house is recorded in my name. You can verify it with the county? The taller officer nodded. Go ahead and show me your ID. I handed it over. You'll want to check with the county recorder's office. This land has been in my family since 1986. He walked to his cruiser with my ID while his partner watched me carefully. I kept my voice level and explained the situation. Karen Simons doesn't live here. She's from McKinley Estates across the creek. This property isn't part of their HOA. Never has been. She says otherwise, the officer replied. She's lying. 10 tense minutes passed before the officer returned. A different expression on his face. He handed back my ID. Mr. Walker, we checked the records. You are indeed the owner of record. I exhaled slowly. But before I could relax, he added, that doesn't explain how they got inside with keys. My eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Keys. No signs of forced entry. The locks matched their keys perfectly. My mind spun. How did Karen get keys? I ran to check the garage. The side lock had been changed. My spare lockbox was gone. The cellar door lock was different too. She had systematically replaced every lock on my property. Unbelievable, I muttered. By the time I returned, Karen stood in the doorway holding a manila folder. These are our temporary occupancy papers from the McKinley HOA board, she announced proudly, handing them to the shorter officer. We filed them last week under emergency relocation guidelines for abandoned properties. There's no legal standing for that, I said. HOA paperwork doesn't override property deeds. Not here. Not anywhere in Colorado. The officers flipped through the papers. We'll need county legal involved. One muttered, this looks unoficial. It is unofficial. I snapped. She squatted in my home while I was out of town, changed my locks, and moved in her family. Karen turned defensive. You were gone for over a week. No lights. No activity. The property appeared abandoned. The HOA had the right to intervene under community protection statutes. You're not a government agency? I replied. You can't claim property. The officers stepped between us. All right. Let's calm down. Mr. Walker, do you have proof of recent residents' utility bills? Security footage. I pulled out my phone. The cameras should have time-stamped motion alerts before I left. I opened the app and scrolled through the logs. Then I stopped. The entire feed was blank. All recordings deleted. The system had been wiped clean. My hands shook. Karen had destroyed or disabled the security system. This wasn't just opportunistic, it was premeditated. She had planned this takeover carefully. I don't have camera footage anymore, I said slowly, but I can get my neighbor Daryl on the phone. He checks on the place when I'm away. I dialed. Voicemail. Daryl was still in Montana. Karen looked like she'd won. Tom came outside carrying boxes. Let's just get what we can, he mumbled. No. Karen snapped. We stay until we're legally removed. That's our right as documented occupants. The officers exchanged glances. We're not judges, the taller one said. Given the conflicting documentation, Mr. Walker, we recommend filing for emergency removal through the court. We can't force them out without a judicial order. What do you mean? I barked. You're telling me I can't enter my own house. It's a civil matter now. If we remove them and a judge rules otherwise, it creates liability issues. You need a court order. Unbelievable. Karen grinned wickedly. It was like watching thieves get away in broad daylight. I was locked out of my own ranch by squatters with fake paperwork, and the police were treating it like a property dispute. Don't worry. Karen called from the doorway. You'll get your day in court. Her daughter, maybe 7 years old, peeked around the door and waved. Hi. Mr. Walker, Mommy says this is our new vacation home. My heart clenched. I turned back to my truck, hands shaking. Vision blurred. They were playing house with my life. My memories. In the home where my wife's ashes rested beneath the oak tree out back. I couldn't stay another second. I needed a plan. The next morning, I drove straight to the courthouse with every document I owned: deed, utility bills, property surveys, tax records. I filed for an emergency restraining order and initiated formal eviction proceedings. Milavier, Linda Mackenzie. reviewed everything with the sharp focus of a hawk. "She's not just squatting," Linda said, studying the fake HOA papers. "She's attempting to create a false chain of title. This could escalate to criminal fraud." "Can she actually get away with this?" "She can try," Linda replied grimly, "but she picked the wrong person to mess with. We'll expose every illegal thing she's done." While the legal process crawled forward, Karen used every day to entrench herself deeper. She posted fake HOA notices on my gate, claiming the property was under protective management. She hosted a community barbecue that weekend, dozens of McKinley Estates residents walking around my fields with beer and lawn chairs like they owned the place. But the most shocking discovery came when I checked my storage shed, hidden behind old farm tools. I found a manila envelope containing printed documents. Inside was a forged sales contract with my signature, claiming I had sold the entire ranch to Karen Simons for $20,000. $20,000 for land worth over $750,000. My signature at the bottom, except I'd never signed it. My stomach dropped. Karen wasn't just squatting. She was building a fraudulent paper trail. If I hadn't returned early, she might have had time to file this forgery with the county recorder. Creating a nightmare of conflicting ownership claims, I photographed everything without touching the documents. Then called Linda immediately. "This changes everything," she said after reviewing the photos. "We're looking at criminal fraud, forgery, identity theft. I'm filing additional complaints with the sheriff's department today." "Good. I want her prosecuted." "She will be. And she's going to wish she never heard of your property." That afternoon, Linda filed motions for emergency injunctive relief and criminal fraud charges. She also discovered something crucial while researching Karen's background. This wasn't her first time. In Utah, Karen had attempted to claim ownership of a disabled man's mobile home after serving as his caretaker, using similar forged documents. The case was sealed, but the pattern was clear. Karen was a serial property predator. 2 days later, deputies served Karen with official eviction papers and a criminal investigation notice. I watched from across the road as she screamed at the officers, waving her fake HOA documents, but this time, the law was on my side. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following week. Karen showed up with a nervous public defender, looking far less polished than usual. Her confident smirk was gone, replaced by the hunted look of someone whose schemes were unraveling. Linda presented our evidence methodically: the forged sales contract, photos of my destroyed security system, witness statements from neighbors who'd seen Karen moving furniture, utility records proving my continuous ownership, and county documents showing my family's 40-year ownership history. Karen's defense was pathetic. She claimed a mysterious man had impersonated me and tricked her into believing she owned the property. She pointed to the forged love letters she'd fabricated and said, "I truly believed he wanted me to have the house." The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge looked disgusted. I have never met this woman outside of HOA meetings. I stated clearly, she invented this entire fantasy. The judge ruled in my favor before Karen finished her testimony. Immediate eviction. Criminal charge proceeding. Restraining order granted. But Karen's revenge wasn't over. That evening, I returned home to find my back door ajar. Someone had broken in again, not to steal, but to destroy. Furniture slashed, walls spray painted with red messages like, "You lied to us," and "We were family." My wife's wedding dress, kept in a sealed garment bag, had been shredded and pinned to the wall with a kitchen knife. I dropped to my knees. This was pure hatred. The sheriff arrived within 20 minutes. Karen had an alibi: she'd checked into a women's shelter that evening, but they weren't sure when she'd actually arrived. More importantly, security footage from a neighbor caught a man matching Karen's brother Dean helping with the destruction. Dean Simons, former real estate broker, disbarred 5 years ago for, you guessed it, forgery and fraud. He'd been helping his sister all along. The next day, Both Karen and Dean were arrested. Dean at a highway checkpoint outside Nevada with fake license plates. Karen at a Greyhound terminal, wearing a wig and carrying a forged passport, trying to flee to Mexico. In her bag, authorities found detailed maps of my ranch with notes scribbled in red ink. One read, "Take back what's mine." The trial was swift. Dean took a plea deal and testified against his sister. The evidence was overwhelming: audio recordings of their planning, fingerprints throughout my house, financial records showing Dean's fake real estate business, and a paper trail of similar scams in 3 other states. Karen was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Dean got 6. Both were ordered to pay full restitution over $400,000 covering property damage, legal fees, lost income, and emotional distress. The fake McKinley Estates HOA dissolved completely when residents learned their president was a convicted felon. Most of the board members claimed they'd been manipulated by Karen's lies. The development voted to remain HOA-free permanently. I rebuilt everything stronger than before. New locks, upgraded security system, reinforced fences. The ranch looked better than it had in years. More importantly, I started working with a veterans legal aid organization, helping other property owners understand their rights and recognize the warning signs of deed fraud. 6 months later, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single page with 2 words, "I'm sorry." Karen's handwriting, whether sincere or manipulative, I couldn't tell. I filed it with the court records as a reminder that evil often wears a friendly face and carries official-looking paperwork. But the best moment came that spring. I was working in the garden when I heard familiar laughter. Miss Ellie from down the ridge had brought her grandchildren to see the chickens. Kids running around the yard, dogs barking. Life returning to normal. "You know what I admire most about you?" "Jacob," Ellie said, watching her grandson chase a rooster. "What's that?" "You never gave up. Even when everyone thought you were crazy, you kept fighting for what was yours." I looked across my 40 acres, the pasture where my father taught me to ride, the barn where Hannah and I planned our future, the oak tree where her ashes rested in peace. Stone Pine Ridge wasn't just property, it was legacy, memory, home. Some things are worth fighting for, I said, and they are. Because in the end, the land knows the truth. And so do I.